In 1977, the Atari 2600 was released to the world. At the time, it seemed like just another one of those newfangled video thingamajiggers. However, it would go on to be one of the most important innovations of the century, forever changing the way we view technology.
Atari Inc. was founded in 1972 under the name Syzygy Engineering. It was founded by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney, who later changed the name to Atari after a dispute over the name Syzygy. Their first act was to create the game Pong, one of the most influential arcade games in history. Bushnell then decided he wanted to develop a way to bring video games out of the arcade and into the home. The finished product was the Atari 2600 and was released on September 11, 1977 under the name Atari Video Computer System, or VCS. It wasn't actually the first console ever, but it was definitely the most popular. The first console ever was the Magnavox Odyssey and was released in 1972. The Odyssey sold a total of 350,000 units over 3 years of production. The Atari 2600, on the other hand, sold 250,000 units in the first 3 months of production. So what exactly set the Atari apart? Why was it so much more popular than the other options that were already on the market? Atari had something that the other companies simply couldn't compete with: the games. They had more titles that were more fun, and for that reason many people bought the Atari simply to play the games, like Pong, Adventure, and Pac-Man. It was the content, not the physical hardware, that set the Atari apart.
Really, it all comes down to content. It's the ideas and the experience of the individual games. It's the number and variety of games you can play using the same console. The winner of the console wars wasn't always the most technically advanced, not the first to market, but the system with the best content. So the 2600 had the games, the content, and it had the distribution, and more importantly, it had the user experience of the system, which was just simple and fun.
While most technology is phased out after a few years for being outdated, the Atari 2600 proved to be timeless. Even with new systems coming out every year, people continued to buy the 2600. Atari continued to sell it until 1991, 14 years after its release day, and they continued to be a sought-after product to this day.
The impact of Atari on the video game industry is undeniable. Its success introduced millions of people to the world of video games and set the video game industry up for the massive growth that it has shown today. The main reason the Atari changed video games forever was the fact that it brought video games into the living room. People no longer had to go to the arcade and pay money every time they lost all their lives or wanted to play again. They could sit on the couch and play as long as they wanted.
The great thing about the 2600 is it allowed us to have an arcade-like experience while at home. It made that arcade-like experience more social, and it made games mass market. The arcade back in those days was kind of a male-oriented gathering place, and maybe most importantly, the 2600 opened video games to a female audience. I've seen estimates that say male to female 2600 users were 50-50, and that was a big change.
The Atari made the video game industry grow into a massive industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Without the 2600, there would be no PlayStation or Xbox consoles. Without games like Adventure, there would be no Halo or Call of Duty. The Atari made it possible for us to dive into the world of video games without having to leave our homes.
The debate about the effects of video games is one that will continue to go on forever. No matter where you stand on them, there's no doubt that they've made a huge impact on our world. Many people will argue that video games have no value. Another common argument is that video games decrease human interaction, but that isn't necessarily true. Video games have certainly changed the way we interact, but it doesn't mean it's for the worse.
Well, games have allowed for a new way of enjoying entertainment and being social. It's created a new genre of sports called esports, but beyond that, it's meant new ways of storytelling that have brought people together. It's shared experiences across generations through the games themselves, but also through the communities that surround those games.
In short, video games have actually created new ways for people to interact with one another. While it's true that there isn't really any face-to-face interactions, there is a potential for interaction on a much bigger scale. You can now play games online with people all around the globe, sharing the games you love with people you wouldn't otherwise get to meet. The world is progressively moving towards more and more digital interaction, and video games are right at the center of this movement.
In conclusion, the Atari was much more than a video game console. It was a way of introducing people to the world of video games that was so rapidly growing. For the first time ever, people didn't just have to watch what happened on a screen, they could control it for themselves. When asked what he thought about the impact of the Atari 2600, Atari founder Nolan Bushnell said,
"Changing the world was too lofty a goal. I felt it was going to be an important product and step in acclimatizing people to the fact that images were now controllable as opposed to just watchable. I've said that video games are the training wheels of computer literacy. I believe we accomplished that."